Her latest work, her latest book, is The Essentials of Teaching Academic Vocabulary, and indeed, she is considered by most as one of the leading scholars, if not the leading scholar, academic vocabulary. And of course, she's very famous for her academic word list, which almost everyone uses for one reason or the other. So, it is our pleasure to introduce Dr. Coxhead.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks very much. I'm not used to speaking into a microphone because I have a very clear New Zealand voice, but I hope that it's okay. So the first thing I need you to do is to say kia ora. Can you do that? Kia ora. Kia ora. So because there are lots of you and one of me, I say kia ora tātou to greet you all. So thank you very much for being here late in the afternoon on what it probably has been a very busy day for everybody. I decided that it's time for me to start talking about word lists. So I prepared a workshop today where we're looking at developing and evaluating word lists for language learners. Now very quickly, you need to know that I come from a family of 7. So that means that I speak very quickly and I'm quite loud as well. So apologies for that, but that's just life. First thing I'm going to do is tell you about another conference. Oh, no, I'm not. Yeah, okay. No, this is what we're going to do today. You first, because I think you're an important part of the day today. We're going to talk about developing a word list and different ways of doing that, different ways of evaluating word lists, and we'll talk about a few that are existing. And then I'm going to look at using word lists and different ways that people use them in the classroom, for example, and call on your experience as well. Then hopefully we'll have a time at the end which is called looking forward. I just need to put my piece of paper down here. Okay. The conference that I want to talk about is called Vocab at Vic. And Vocab at Vic is happening on December 18 to 20. And you can find out about it at vocab.org.nz. I think you can imagine that there are a few people at Victoria University who might be presenting, but there are also going to be some people in this room who will be there as well. We're really excited about it. Okay, so the first question I said that we would do, we went back and I don't know why. Sorry about that. Thank you. That'll be great. So the first thing I'd like to do is for you to talk to the person next to you, and I want you to run through these questions. What experiences have you had with word lists? How have you used them? Which ones have you used? When, all of those sort of good questions. And then which ones and what questions do you have for this workshop? Now, in New Zealand, the national sport is rugby. So we're going to pretend this is a bit of a rugby match because we don't have much time. So we're going to do, this is a 2-minute thing. And I want you to talk to the person next to you, and the person who has travelled the furthest to come to the conference today, you start. Okay? You start with the questions. You ready? You got 2 minutes? Go. Okay, folks, I'm going to have to stop you there. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wrap it up. Okay. We've already had mention of something called the academic word list. Some people might have mentioned the general service list. Have we got any others out there that you've used regularly? British National Corpus lists, yeah?
The list that, I guess, the Korean government?
Korean government list, yep. I think the Japanese government has one too. Yep. Cambridge University have got a list. Yep. Charles Brown's got a list. I'll talk about that in a minute, yep.
We use them indirectly when we use, let's say, nations speed reading stuff.
Yep. So there are materials that you might be using that have been developed based on word lists. So, for example, you might use the vocabulary levels test, which is another piece of work from Paul Nation that was based on word lists that were developed, mine and some others that were developed a fair while ago, and some that don't exist, which is one of the interesting things about the levels test. A colleague of mine at Victoria University has created the Advanced Practical Word List for people who are advanced level learners who just need to start learning some of those items that a much more lower frequency, but you need them every day still, trying to figure out what those words might be and how they work. Charles in the front's just released a new general service list, which is available online. There's a productive academic word list, which has been developed on the argument that it's not just a receptive purposes thing, but it's also for production. So there are all kinds of things available as word lists. Were there any particular questions that you wanted to ask at this point to respond to this so that I know what you're thinking about? Yeah.
Any specific software that you use to create these word lists?
Yeah, I can answer that question. Yep, I'll write that one up. Software. Hey, it's a long time since I wrote on a board. But it's kind of nice, isn't it? It's really... Yep, good question. Okay, cool. Let's move on. I'm going to come back to you again. So, 5 ways to make a word list. This is a cartoon character called Harry McCleary. If anybody's got children, this is a very famous New Zealand writer. I was just recently in the UK, and somebody in the UK said, we've got this writer in the UK who writes Harry McCleary from Donaldson's Dairy. It's all right, I killed her. It's okay. No problem. Okay, so I want to turn to the person next to you and say, okay, let's brainstorm 5 ways to make a word list. How could you do it? You've got 1 minute. Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. 5 ways to make a word list. Back corner. Anybody? 1 way.
Frequency.
Use the frequency of a what?
All people?
Yep. With the words that people use.
Yes.
Yep. And make a frequency list. Beautiful. Over here, you guys. What are you going to do? Same idea. Oh, it doesn't count. You guys in the front. Charles, you've made a word list.
Oh, I've made lots of word lists, but there's one tool I really like that I think I just wanted to share. It's a tool on Tom Cobb's website, and it's called the keyword tool. And what it does is it compares the words in any text that you pop in there. It compares the frequency of the words in those texts with the words in a standardized corpus. And then the ones that are more frequent in yours than the standardized corpus come up as a word list. So it's a very, very quick and easy, like 3-minute way to find out which words you should be teaching in a given text.
Yep.
I think that's a really nice,
Yep.
that's a nice one.
Yep. Great. Anybody else? Yeah.
Related to ESD, maybe you get all the books of medical textbooks, find out the words which are valuable.
Yep. So that response was collect all the textbooks and the readings for a particular subject area like medicine and use them as a corpus to make a word list. Yep. Any more?
Students can make their own list on incidental encounters with new words.
Yep. Tell me again on...
Students can make their own list as they incidentally encounter
Yep.
new words.
Yep. The ancient method of making a word list. Beautiful. Love it.
Take the compulsory textbook you're assigned and find out what's actually in there
Yep.
and what you should actually be teaching.
Yep. Yep. And you could do that online using keyword tool or you could do it manually. Yep. Thank you.
Is the glossary a word list?
Can be. Yep.
So any online programs these days, many online
Yeah.
programs have glossaries.
Yeah.
If you have time, there's a plug for another session that's tomorrow. We have a free website called Extensive Reading Central, and we have a couple of tools that allow you to pop in any text and create a word list and then learn those words using flashcards.
Yeah.
So I think there's a large range of digital tools that you can use. Some that we've made, some that Tom's made, some
Yeah.
that Paul's made. But
Yeah.
there's a
Can
lot.
you come and put the link up?
Oh, sure.
Is that all right? Okay, that's good. Now, one method which has been used in the past that you haven't talked about today is asking an expert and getting them to tell you, right? So again, because this is a workshop, I want you to be doing some more work. So I'm going to get you to turn to the person next to you and say, right, we're going to pick a specialist discipline. I've given you a couple of keywords here. Reading, because that's what we're about. Soul, because that's where we are. Conferences, because that's what's happening. Rugby, I don't know. I just thought maybe. And then computer science down there as well. Choose one or decide if you have a subject that you share with the person next to you and you know that you're both passionate about that, and let's keep this very, above board. What I'd like you to do is to very quickly, you've got a task to do, I want you to note down as many words as you can related to that subject in 1 minute. So again, I'm going to time you because that's the sort of person I am. All right? So don't talk to the person next to you, just do it yourself. You ready? Have a talk, what's your subject, and then write. Go. Oh, that's a good topic.
That's her major.
Who's your person? All three? What's your subject? What are you going to do? Oh, good. Yeah. Have you got a subject? Probably not rugby. Are you going to do conferences? Yep, good idea. Away you go. Yep. So you write down your words, and away you go. You working by yourself? Oh, okay. All right. Somebody can come and sit there. Okay. Now what I want you to do is to share your list with the person next to you and see what's in common between the two. Go. What's in common? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here's your next question. What might this exercise tell us about making word lists this way? Have a think about that. So what is it about this methodology which causes you to think about making word lists? So what might happen if you ask an expert to make a word list this way? Positives and negatives. Go. Another chat. Go. And here's another question for you. Back at the board. How many of these words do you think a student of the discipline would know? So let's think about it from a student perspective, not just a teacher perspective. Keep talking. Go. Another question. Come on, Jay. Oh! You okay? Yeah? Thinking?
That's an easy question. How much time?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good response to that. And here's one more question. What problems might you get when you ask an expert? So I'm trying to get you to come back again. Teacher perspective, student perspective, and then come back again. And you have half a minute now. Go.
If I ask you a question, it costs me a beer, so. It's quite expensive.
Yeah, it could be.
I'm getting drunk.
Okay, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right. Now, I wrote this on the board. What does it mean to know a word? Because when we start looking at this third point, how many words would a student of that discipline know? I think knowing is a very important word. You can hear my New Zealand accent with the word know, can't you? What does it mean to know a word? So receptively, do they recognise it when they see it? Do they use it? You know, it's all of those sort of big questions. We only do big questions today in this workshop. So what would be the positives of asking an expert? You've got an expert, somebody who knows a lot about what they're doing. They've probably thought about the vocabulary of the field. I've been doing some research with secondary school teachers and asking them what they do about teaching specific vocabulary to their students. And one of the most interesting responses that I've had so far from my perspective is the teachers say basically that at a certain point in a secondary school career, usually around when students are 15 or 16 years old, the non-native speakers in the classroom have the same disadvantages as the native speakers in the classroom when it comes to specialised vocabulary. Everybody needs it. And so it's really interesting that the teachers that I've talked to have basically said when it gets to this level of specialisation, doesn't matter who you are, I teach these words to the class. And then you say, how do you teach them? And you can hear teachers getting older and older in the interviews as they talk, you know, because they've tried all of the ways, right? So one of them said, I try not to use the words, I try to use the words, I try to get them to use the words, you know, and a New Zealander, so all the ends of the sentences go up at the end, so it makes it sound even more stressful. Okay. Problems? Any problems? Apart from the fact it's really hot. Yeah, especially if you pay them in beer. Absolutely, yeah.
Blind spot.
Blind spots, yep. They might know far too much. Yeah.
Words that experts deem important may not actually be the most valuable and used for them.
Yeah. And you can certainly see that point about the use from the learning perspective of, so what's the starting point of the learners and where are you trying to get to and how are you going to be able to do that? So another approach which is familiar to me and probably to other people here is using a corpus. So the idea of using a corpus or a body of text is that you try and develop word lists for use in language classrooms and independent study. So you're trying to build on what's already in a text and take that and say, well, if this is a text that a student uses, this is what I want to use the word list from. And that's something that Charles was talking about earlier on. Why do them? Large-scale investigations. We've got some new word lists out there that are built on millions and millions and millions of words in a corpus. Should be pretty easy to replicate, so that's a good thing in research, because if I build a word list and then Jay builds a word list and we get roughly the same stuff using the same methodology, whew, that's good. Okay. You can use both written and spoken data. Spoken data is much more expensive to deal with, much trickier in terms of getting people to say yes, that's okay, ethics-wise as well. And it can be short work for a computer, but it can be a lot of work for a human, eh? You know, you just go, yay, I've got all this data. I've got all this data. Mike Stubbs, who's somebody who's done a lot of work in corpus linguistics, says about using corpora that the really important thing is to know which questions to ask. You've got to have good questions and good principles for working with them. So I used a corpus in my academic word list work, and you have to think really carefully about a corpus if you're going to use it to build a word list. So you have good questions like, what do the students need? First of all, I review quite a few articles at the moment of people who've looked at journal articles, and then you say, well, who are your students? And they say first year university students. And it's like, well, do they read these things? Yes, no, you know. And usually the face of the person is probably blank because they're not really sure why, you know, why would you ask that question? But I think it's a very important question. How much language do the students actually know? And therefore, what the purpose of the study is, and what do you actually want to create? I get emails from people saying, the academic word list is just a list of words. And I say, yeah. You know, it's like, it is. The word list was made, well, I was younger, you know, when the word list was made. It was made through a lot of blood, sweat and tears. At the time, with the computer program that I had, I would set the computer going overnight and in the morning come in and it would be ready. The work would be ready. Now it's done in a second, you know. So there are lots of things, you know, why didn't you create na-na-na? It's like, I was not doing that. I was making an academic word list, you know. So you have principles and ideas that you have to work with. When it comes to the corpus, you need to have a sizable corpus. There are arguments around using small corpora as well. You need to know that it's representative. That argument comes through again. What kind of texts you want to collect, and then how you're going to keep them, written or spoken. Who's the writer? Have you got professional writers or are they student writers? So you get different kinds of corpora that way. And then how you're going to organise all of this work. I have a student at the moment who's working on a corpus, And she was sitting in my office the other day saying, I said, oh, so how are you going to keep your files? And you could see her just thinking, it'll be easy. And I was like, okay, well, when I was collecting my corpus, the problem I had was I had lots of files called final. It's just not useful, It's a final. Oh, this one's final. It's like student assignments, Your student sends you an assignment and it says assignment. It's like, oh, that's good. Thank you for that. Could you put your name on it next time, please? Okay. There are some recent word lists out there. Hang on. Sorry, I know what I'm doing. My finger sticks. Okay. Here are some recent examples of some word lists. I've actually missed one out, which was Charles in the front here. Sorry about that. This has just come out, a new general service list, and you've got a new general service list, so we need to do some work to figure out different ways that things are being done. A new academic vocabulary list from Gardner and Davies, who are at Brigham Young University. You might be interested in that. And then Martinez and Schmidt, and I'm going to talk about this later, a phrasal expressions list, because there's something that happens when you start looking at words when they are in company with other words, right? So that I just wanted to bring a couple of those examples up because this work, most of it has been done through a corpus, so it's become a kind of standard way. Yep.
Just before what you've got to get to the corpus.
Yep.
Do you mean the okay from the authors of all these papers?
Yeah, so one of the mistakes that I made, now that I'm older I know more, when I developed my academic word list corpus, I wanted other people to be able to access that corpus. And what happened was, with some authors, it was no problem. They'd just say, yep, that's fine. I still have one man who's a professor on campus at Victoria University who every time he sees me says, oh, I still haven't sent you that form to say yes. That's a long time ago, guys. I published it in 2000, so that's 1998, 1999. So people contact me and say, can I use the course? No, I can't allow other people to do that. So it's a big point. Norbert Schmidt's book, Researching Vocabulary, help me out here. At the back of that book, he has a whole list of publicly available corpora. So if you want to do some work on something that's already existing and able to be used, you can take a look at that book to help you out. Yep.
That I think I understand, but when you're making the corpus,
yep,
all those texts, did you need
yep.
permission from
yep.
every single one who wrote the text?
Yeah, I did. And there are 400, and that's my other favourite thing is, it's only a small corpus. It's like, yeah, it is. But, it started from zero. So, yeah, it's a long time ago. You can do a lot more now than you could then. Yeah.
I was just going to say, but there are a lot of different ways that you can gather corpora, and there are a lot of ways where you can get access without having to get permission from every single author. Yeah. We for the new general service list worked with the Cambridge International Corpus, and all we had to do was get permission from one place, from one publisher, and then we took 273 million words from their 2 billion word corpus without having to contact every author. So it was very easy, but I think there are a lot of different directions you can go for gathering.
Yes.
I think the way Avril did it with the academic corpus, it would be required specific types of text. That's a little bit harder, but for a general corpus, it's a little bit easier.
So did you all hear that at the back? Basically, what Charles is saying is that through the development of his new general service list, what he did is approached a publisher, basically, and was able to access that corpus, which it's astonishing, isn't it, that people can do that stuff nowadays. It's fantastic. Okay, now I don't want to spend much time on this, but I thought I'd better talk about the academic word list just very quickly. Bhartia Laufer calls it Avril's word list. So there you go. I thought that's quite funny. It's a study of corpus linguistics. It's an example of a common core approach. And what I mean by common core approach is that what I was looking at was saying, if my students have a basic level of vocabulary of around 2,000 words, then what's next for them? That was what I was trying to do. So I wasn't looking at every word as an example of if it's used differently in different areas, what happens then. I didn't do that work. That work's been done by Professor Ken Hyland, for example, and Paul Tse out of Hong Kong University. If you're interested in that work, follow it up. It's interesting stuff. Okay. one of the key things about the academic word list, I think, is that it really is Greco-Latin in nature. It's about, and I know this because my friend from Classics said, oh, for goodness sake, give me the list and I'll classify it for you and give it back to you. And of course, she understands this stuff much more than I do, so 82%. Okay. It was based on West's General Service List, and there are consequences. If you base a word list on something that's already been done, there's always going to be trouble with that, right? So one of the things is that with West's General Service List is that he used different principles, not just frequency. Who said frequency? One of you guys in the middle said, yeah, you talked about frequency. He included different kinds of principles in selecting words for his word list. So one principle was, why give learners 2 words when 1 word does the job? Right? And job is a good example of that. So out of job and work, he chose work. It's a noun, it's a verb. You know, there might have been a frequency thing in there as well. So you'll see words in the academic word list like final, and you think, why is that in there? It's because end is in the general service list, so therefore the final came through in the corpus work. If you look at Paul Nation's British National Corpus lists, that's done basically on frequency, and that's cleaned up some of that messy stuff around the general service list. Okay, so quick, what is it? Academic word is 570 word families, which often gets reported as something else. 565, 550. Some people like taking words out of the academic word list and putting them somewhere else. I find that very strange, but that's okay. There were principles of word selection. Words had to make frequency, range, and uniformity measures. They're organised into sublists and organised into word families as well. Now, word families means, in the academic word list, that if you have a word like analyse, then you'll also have analysis, reanalyse, unanalysed, blah, 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 blah. Now, that can be a problem for making a specialised word list where you have many different types, where it's the word type that's going to be the technical word, right? How do I explain that? Significant is a good example. So if you have the word significant in statistics, it has a specific meaning, but if you take it out of that context, it doesn't carry that same meaning. You okay with that? So in a word list which was highly specialised, significant would be in there, but actually it has an everyday meaning as well. So that's one of the things that we'll talk about in a minute. Okay. Here's an example of the sublists and a little kiwi for you to take a quick look at. One of the nightmares of the academic word list is I get teachers saying, I have all my students learning all the words that start with C, and you think, oh, please don't do that. Here's an example of the AWL in context, so some of the words there are repeated, and so if you take a look at that, you'll see that analysis comes up several times, financial comes up several times. These words just don't happen by themselves. One of the pieces of work I've been doing recently is looking at AWL words that collocate or go together with other AWL words. So they kind of boost each other's frequency, and I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. Okay. Academic word list has been busy since it was developed. Highland and Say, this is an article which looked at professional and student writers, a biggish corpus around the same. AWL coverage came in at 10% there. And it seems to be a kind of a regular finding in finance. Lee and Chan, same sort of coverage, same as mine. Here's another one, applied linguistics. And there are more examples of this. So it seems to maintain it's around 10%. If you want to see more examples of that, take a look at an article called I published in 2011 in TESOL Quarterly about the academic word list. Oh, sorry, that's down the bottom. It's too far down the bottom. Okay. So I'm not really wanting to talk more about the list here, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about how it was made and how it was put together. Are you still all right, you guys? Must be. I'll get you to do some work soon. Okay. So when we think about word lists, we need to think about how were they made, how were they evaluated. So with the academic word list, for example, I developed it from a corpus, and then I developed another corpus of fiction and ran the new list through the fiction corpus, because if the word list was a more general corpus than an academic one, that's a problem, right? And then I developed a third corpus, which was another academic corpus, and ran it through that again, because if the words are just occurring in the first academic corpus but not in the second one, that's a problem too, okay? You right? So that's a way that I did that. Do they use word types or word families? And I've just explained a little bit about the difference there. Okay, we're on it. So, something that's really happening more and more is specialised word lists. And some examples, we've got Jeremy Ward, who works in Thailand. Jeremy Ward's take on it is that you start with nothing, right? You assume that your students know nothing. And you say, right, I'm going to build a word list from nothing, all my students together as a cohort. Right, here's this word list. So, oh no, do I have an example? I think I do. Sorry, a little bit later.
Assuming no knowledge of
Assuming no knowledge of anything in English, right from zero, because he knows his learners. You know, he knows he's got people in the room who probably don't know very much English. And that's a very powerful position to be in, I think. I don't mean that he's powerful in a negative way. I mean, it's a very good way to know what people in the room know. Is you're in a much better position as a teacher than if you don't know what they know. You all right? Okay. Coxhead and Hirsch, I liked making word lists so much I made another one. This was science-specific vocabulary. Jen Green has done work on middle school vocabulary lists, and we've got a book coming out soon about that, middle school in the United States. And what she's been doing is looking at the subject-specific vocabulary, academic vocabulary. So you might find that interesting too. Okay. A guy called Paul Radford, who's one of my MA students, has just finished a thesis on computer science vocabulary, and I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow in my talk. But one of the things that he found early on was he compared his findings with a guy called Linus Treefoot, which has to be the best name ever. Linus Treefoot, who he's another student of mine, developed an IT word list, so information technology, and he had words like modem and applet and diskette and frame. How long is it since you used the word diskette? You know, yeah. And then Paul Radford in 2013 saying, oh, now we're talking about clouds. You know, we've got social environments. And the thing that really strikes me about this kind of work is that cloud is an everyday word, isn't it? But it has very special meanings. One of my aunties was asking me about clouds the other day. You know, when people talk about clouds, what do they mean? Okay, well, we need to talk about computers, yes. And the clever thing I think about computer usage, and I learnt this from Paul Radford, is that the computer science industry, and I've never thought about this before, but everything you do with a computer is something that you're very familiar with. You file things, you open folders, you save them, you open them, you close them. It's everyday vocabulary, very, very clever. It means you don't have to learn a new vocabulary to operate this technology, right? Okay, so I'll talk more about Paul's stuff soon, tomorrow. Here's Jeremy Ward. Just because he's much more specialised. So this is his basic engineering, lower proficiency undergraduates. He knows his learners. It's very, very important. Final word list is really tiny. Look, 299 word types. Imagine that. But it's powerful, 16% coverage, right? Why? Because it contains words that are from the first 1,000 words of English, second 1,000 words, and from the academic word list as well. So it's very targeted. It's a very specialised word list for his learners in this time, in this place. And I think that's a really interesting way of developing things. Okay. Top 10 words. System, shown, equation, example, value, design, used, section, flow, and given. Interesting. Charlie's going, Can you please turn to the person next to you? Have a quick chat about those words. If you can see them, I'll tell you them again. System, shown, equation, example, value, design, used, section, flow, and given. And this is engineering, right? So have a chat to the person next to you and say, well, you know, are there any issues with doing this? Or what do you think about this approach? And I'm going to give you half a minute because we don't have time. Ready? Go. What do you think? What do you think? Could you do this? What are you thinking about, Charlie Brown?
I'm thinking 294 of the 200.
Okay. So if you're quick, you will have added up how many words are in the first 1,000 and the second 1,000 in the academic word list there, and it's actually the majority of the words in that list. If you think about the specialisation side of things, if I said to you which of these words are specialised for engineering, which ones would you say? System? Equation, yeah. Excuse me. Design, maybe, yeah. Flow. It's not often you talk about flow. Hey, maybe in academic writing you might talk about flow, but I suppose it's the same idea, isn't it? Really, things are moving through. Yep. Any other thoughts about that before I move on? You all right? You sure? Right. Come on then. Quick. What else can you do with word lists? Oh, this is a Buzzy Bee. This is a national toy from New Zealand. Children use that. They walk. You know, when they're just learning to walk, they get a little Buzzy Bee. It probably gives them something else to think about apart from the pain of falling over when you're trying to learn to walk all of the time. So we can use word lists to find out about the words, the nature of the words in a text. And this is some of the work that I've been doing recently using Paul Nation's British National Corpus lists. And what I'm going to do now is show you two tables of data. And what your job is to talk to the person next to you again, but this time it's the person who has the longest hair is the first person to talk. Okay. It always takes a little while to work that one out. Okay. You two got an interesting scenario. Okay. So, what you've got here is it was a small corpus of TED Talks. Do you all know what TED Talks are? Right, okay, good. So, across here you've got 6 subjects: business, design, entertaining, blah, 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 blah. This is 3,000 British National Corpus list plus proper nouns, and this tells you the coverage. So, what we're looking for is 98%. That's what we want to get to, okay? So, what I want you to do is to take a look at that person with the longest hair. Your first thing is to say, what do I think about this? What do I see? Or if you don't understand it, say to the person next to you, I don't understand. Can you tell me, please? You ready? You got half a minute. Go. What's interesting here? I want you to talk. Go. You want to be looking around here. People to get their heads around. One question over here, why 98%? Because that's the point where learners should be at unassisted comprehension. Okay, but the closer you can get to 100, the better off you are. And let's face it, there can be a big difference between 3,000 words, which is 93% here, and over 9,000 words, you know? That's a big gap for learners, right? Okay, so the interesting stuff here, the first question was, do TED Talks of different subject areas have a similar profile or a different profile? And the answer is, it's pretty similar, right? Because I wanted to know whether or not, if you're teaching an English for academic purposes class using TED Talks, are there any subject areas that are going to be a bit easier for people? Another key point about this table is that it suggests that TED Talks are like academic texts and like newspaper articles. They require very similar amounts of words. You all right with that? So to read a newspaper, and this is coming up again in my talk tomorrow, but we're going to be talking about this idea of coverage and how we might consider it in our language classes. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, I don't know if it was a published study. I don't know if it was a published study, but I was recently talking with Phil Hubbard out at Stanford, and he actually does a listening course that uses TED Talks, and he arranged them by doing vocab profile analysis of the talks and looking at the speaking speed. And he sort of scaffolded the ones that were easier earlier in the curriculum. It was quite interesting. His students reported being helped by that, and I thought that was an interesting.
Yeah, brilliant. That's great. What was the name of the guy again?
Phil Hubbard at Stanford.
Phil Hubbard at Stanford. Okay, yeah, that's good. So this was another MA student of mine. We published this study in 2012. So we were basically saying, well, what do teachers use in class? Well, let's try and find out a bit about those kind of texts. Another table for you. This is SEC means secondary, Sci means science, right? And textbooks means textbooks. So what we're doing here is very small corpus, but year 9, you're kind of 12, 13 years old. Year 9, year 10, you're a little bit older, you're right, okay. I want you to take a look. This is general service list, first 1,000, second 1,000, that's the academic word list, and this is the science-specific word list that I got. Okay, similar coverage figures. What stands out for you here when you look at this data? Now you know what you know about 98%. You right? Ready? Person with the shortest hair, you go first. Go. Talk about this data. Four, 3, 2, 1. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is that when I used the British National Corpus list for that 98%, we didn't get to 98% very easily. So even the year 9, you needed a vocabulary size of around 9 to 10,000 words plus proper nouns. By the time you get up to year 11, it was over 15,000 plus proper nouns. And then up to year 12, it was over 20,000 plus proper nouns. So the title of the article is, what is it? What makes science textbooks difficult to read in secondary school? And one of the answers is vocabulary. So if you need a vocabulary size of over 20,000, you know, and you're a second language speaker, hello, that's a big problem. And if you're a native speaker, and that's why Paul Nation and I have been doing work on vocabulary size testing in secondary schools, it's because we want to find out more about that side of things too. Now back to this table. We never get to 98%. Down here we got 12%, so that's what? It's just over 87%. We're nowhere near. Even with proper nouns, which adds around 2%, we're nowhere near. What's really interesting about science text is the large number of proper nouns that are in there, because Alzheimer's is a name, right? So how do you treat those words in a science list? It's a real problem. Okay, what else strikes you about this? I hope you will have seen, first of all, that we don't get anywhere near 98%. That was one of the key points. Second key point, look at the jump going from year 9. Down here is not in any list is nearly 8%. Up here is over 12%. That's a lot of words in a text, right? So if you think about a text as having 100 words, that's a lot of words that don't occur on these lists anyway. Yep, Charles, go.
I was sort of surprised by the high coverage of the GSL 2000, because just in a lot of just other studies I've just seen, it's very low, like 3 or 4%.
Yeah.
Arguments that the second 1,000 words of the GSL might not be the best place to go after the first one.
Yeah.
But it's quite high.
It is. What Charles is saying is that, I mean, these first 1,000 coverage, that's what I expected it to be. These ones are a little bit higher, and that's because there are words in the second 1,000 which come up, and I had examples, but I took them away from this one. It's not cell. What are the words? If you're looking at medicine, there are words like blood in the second 1,000, and because it comes up, and it comes up a lot in medical texts, you know, it bumps up that coverage. I was interested in the AWL. That seems about right for me. It's lower than the 10% from tertiary. That means secondary school text, these ones are a bit easier. Look at the science-specific word list. When we ran this science-specific word list over university texts, it was just over 3%. But in these secondary school texts, it's almost double, which is interesting, isn't it? So you got stuff going on there as well. And here's 4.5. I'm going to move on. Can we talk about it? Yeah, it's okay. All right, you okay? So you've done heavy data today. You're still with me. It's all right. I'm never going to her talks again. Jeez. Okay. What do we do with everyday words? This is always a problem, right? We talked about clouds. Well, I talked about clouds and you all nodded, and that was very kind. We get general usage stuff that happens not only with vocabulary but also with grammar, right? So in general usage you get present, like we presented the results, and that's okay. It's not often followed with, apart from in the passive voice, right? In medical text, present is often followed by with, right? So the patient presented with pain in the upper right molar, which doesn't sound nice, but that presented with is a very common pattern in medical texts. You get high frequency words in medicine like bypass, like heart bypass, and neck, but they also occur outside the specialised context. So what do you do about that? I've already talked about significant. Cloud, you put cloud in a word list, and in 5 years' time people are going to be laughing at you because, people don't use that. General services doesn't have computer in it. Of course it doesn't. It was made in 1953, hello. Telegram, that's right, and tape. No, AWL has tape in it. Okay, so there are questions when you're making word lists. Things come up and you think, well, does it belong here? Does it not? How do you verify that? What do you do with those kinds of patterns? And I think this is the sort of thing that learners need to know, especially if they're training to be a doctor, right? They need to know that when you're writing up your notes, this patient presented with, having been at a workshop at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Seoul in Korea, tiredness. Okay, let's move on. Now, I think it's important to look beyond the single word, because we're now in a time when we're not only looking at words, but we're looking at the company that they keep. And it's a very famous quote. So I've got a bit more for you to look at here today. So what else might be in a corpus of academic writing? For example, you got your words, 10 words. There might be 2-word collocations, so words that go together. You might get frames. So the most common frame is a, of, right? A, of, and that means you could put different words in there. So a lot of, problems, or something like that. Could be an idiom or two, or a metaphor or two in there as well. And my colleague Frank Boers has done a lot of work on metaphor, and he does activities where he, for example, gives half the class a text which has a lot of war-like vocabulary in it, and then gives the other half of the class a text with more medical type vocabulary in it, and then gets them to have a debate. And in the end, when they're talking about a business problem, and in the end you can guarantee that you guys will be using war metaphors and you guys will be talking about medical, it's a very strong image in there as well. So I've been doing a bit of work on what happens when you look beyond just the single word. And I want to give you a bit of this data as well. So if you look at the word consume, which is in sublist 2 of the academic word list, you find out pretty soon that consumer and consumers are the most frequent form, right? That makes sense. That's okay. Consumes over there. So this is what happens when you get a word family and you say, which are the most frequent words in that word family? So which ones do we want to focus on? And then the really interesting thing comes up when you say, if we look at the word consume, what comes after it? And in the academic word list corpus, you get consume more, consume and. So you do something else. You consume it and then I'm not sure what you do next. And then consume, then you've got more than, right? These two follow. Now, what happens after consumer? Turn to the person next to you and say, what do you reckon? 3 words that you're going to find after the word consumer. Go. After the word consumer. Well, corpus, you got consumer goods, consumer price, consumer and, consumer guarantee. We start getting quite technical, don't we? Quite quickly. Consumer index, consumer price index is big in New Zealand. Prices, durables and consumer research. So stuff happens when you look to the right or to the left of a word. And this is useful in teaching, I think. Yeah?
Not my idea, his idea, but where's of?
Consumers of? It might be 11 or 12 on the list. Yep. This is just the top 10. Yep. That's a good question. Okay. Now, is there any difference when you look at words to the left and to the right of a key word? Nodding. Good audience members over there in that group. Okay, so if you get the word analysis, if you have analysis and, these are the kinds of patterns that you get. Analysis and assessment, so you analyse it first and then you do something else. And what's the something else? You evaluate, you interpret, you manage. Yeah. We've just recently had a scare in New Zealand with Fonterra and the milk products and whether or not they're safe or not. So they did an analysis and then they've caused a problem and hopefully they're managing it now. What do you reckon it's going to be if you go meh and analysis? So what's going to come up before the and? Yeah. So you're finding yourself thinking, well, what goes before an analysis, right? So, and then getting tired, and so we've got description and analysis, data collection, that's what you were talking about, and analysis, representation and analysis. So you do these things first and then you do that, okay? I was also interested in what happens when you look in different corpora, arts, commerce, science, blah, blah, with analysis. If you look left, you get data analysis. That makes sense. Factor analysis. That makes sense. Yep. Methods of analysis. Looking to the right, you get data and methods again. This is the academic word list words bolstering each other up, right? So you can look to the left and data will be there. You can look to the right and data will be there because these two words really like each other a lot. What do you do with data? You analyse it. Or unless you have too much of it, you ignore it and go to conferences instead. No, not true. Interestingly, analysis is stronger to the left than to the right. You know how people are right-handed and left-handed? Words can be a bit like that too. Did you know dogs are left-handed and right-handed? It's true. It's true. You've got to check that out. They roll one way more easily than the other. It's true. It's true, I swear. There you go. Okay, good. And then the thing is, in arts and commerce, is factor in there? Yes. What about law and science? They don't tend to talk about them as much. Oh, sorry, factor analysis. When you look at factor analysis, they don't talk about it much. In my corpus, they might in something that you bring together. So what you're seeing is patterns in the data, which I think could be useful for teaching and learning. And then it's also it's useful to find out when something doesn't occur as much as when it does occur. Do you know what I mean? So if you're teaching a group of law students about factor analysis, you might get blank faces, and that's because they haven't seen it in the materials. They haven't seen it in what they, it's just not there. So we need to be teaching them what's there, I think. Another job for you. Philip Durant has an academic collocations list, and these are his top 10 words to the left. With the person next to you, predict what's going to be to the right. Just go for the top 3 that you think you can get. You ready? Go. It's too hot.
Yeah, it's really hot.
It's really hot. Can we open the door? Have you got an aircon unit in your bag, Charlie? That's a good idea. I don't need one. You guys need one. I'm good. No, I'm good. I'm okay. I'm okay. Thank you.
No, but I know as a presenter, you must be twice hot.
All right. You ready? I'm sure you can tell me this one. With. Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Okay, this is a 25 million word corpus. So this paper, academic texts, right? Associated with, absolutely. Based on, yeah.
Your headers are washed out.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, that says word 1, word 2, and then mean frequency per million of words. Okay. Now, if you're a student of English for academic purposes and you came into my class and I said, I'm going to teach you some academic collocations, and the first one is this paper. So even though the data is there, teachers still make decisions. Hey, it's good to know. It's really good to know. One of the things that I take heart from with this is that this is often followed by a noun. I have writers, MA writers and PhD writers who like to say this, and they don't give me a noun. And I keep thinking, just give me a noun. Give me a noun. I don't have to work this hard when I read your papers. Just give me a noun. This what? Give me a noun, and then I'll be happy. Just a noun. Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's look at some more. Hopefully I got the headers right. This is 2-word phrases. Mike Nelson's big business English corpus work where he has spoken and written. 2-word phrases. Take a look down there. And then we've got 3-word phrases. And this is a study by Crawford Kamicciotoli. What I want you to do is to turn to the person next to you and go, what's happening here with these patterns? What are we seeing? They're both to do with with business English. What's happening when you look at 2 words and 3 words and then lexical bundles? What do you see as teachers? What's interesting here? Go. Half a minute, go. What I see as a teacher is that in the middle you've got 3-word phrases that are very general. We need to. Okay, good. I don't know what a GDP deflator is. Hopefully if I saw one in my garden I would know. But we get more technical, don't we, over here? It's quite interesting. So if you're looking at these words collocations, so if somebody develops a word list, are they looking at collocations? Are they looking at a 3-word phrase, a 4-word phrase? What are we looking at? How have they found this data? These are all the same questions coming through. Okay. Now, I did another bit of work on lexical bundles in academic texts. And what I'm going to show you is a table which looked at the results of Doug Biber and his colleagues doing research on lexical bundles in academic texts, Ken Hyland doing a follow-up study to take a look to see what he could find in a corpus, and then the work that we found in our academic corpus. And this is what we found. These ones were all shared, and this is just the top 10. Okay, note, on the other hand, is much more frequent than on the one hand. That's interesting. You know, so there's something else that people do in text to introduce an idea, and then they go on the other hand. You know what I mean? So this, on the one hand, everybody together chant on the one hand, and then on the other hand, doesn't come through in the corpus. There's interesting work here. Do we go the end of the or at the end of? In which case there's going to be the. You know, where's the boundary of the lexical bundle? And how do you make sense of that? Does that make sense? Are you all right with that? So here you've got the end of the and at the end of. And you know that that's going to be the, right? It's not going to be anything else. The nature of down here is in the form of and in terms of the. Yeah, and the frequencies are very, very close. That 32 is the slide number, by the way. Okay. Now, more people have done more work. Academic formulas work. This is Simpson, Flack and Alice. An analysis. So what they did is they did the Mike Nelson thing. So they got academic speaking, academic writing, non-academic speaking, non-academic writing, right? So they're doing a comparison study. They got a core list of what they're calling formulas. And the first 200 of the spoken and written formulas from the different academic corpora. So they did an analysis. It's a big study. What did they find? They categorized them. I have to read it from down here, sorry. So they categorized the items. They had formulas of contrast and comparison. So they took the form, right? And they said, well, okay, what's the function? What's going on here? So you got the same, what is it? As, such as, and the same, and as opposed to. Right, so you've got core. What's common and core across all of these? Spoken data came up with nothing to do. Nothing to do as an academic formula, according to that. From the spoken data, the same thing. So thing sounds more spoken than written, right? Be related to and is more likely is primarily from the written data. So you can see that these bundles they're different. So you get the same thing as spoken, but it's not occurring in the written data. Does that make sense? And then interestingly, blah, blah, blah is used, it comes up in the spoken list because it comes from an academic corpus of spoken text, and that's lecturers going blah, 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 you know, and blah, 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 blah. Another way of saying and so on, right? And I haven't done it yet, but I am desperate to teach blah, 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 blah to my students because it's there. It's there. Now, I've got a bit of a word of caution about multi-word units. And the word of caution is you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince. So on the basis of 3.6 million words, 308 times, sounds a lot, but that ends up being twice per 15,500 words. That's a lot of words to read before you get to that. Do you know what I mean? And then when you get to that, it's probably wrapped up in a whole lot of difficult text as well, right? So if you're talking to learners and saying, we're going to look at this on the basis of, and how does it work, and what does it mean, and they're going to go, cool, and then they're going to read their text, and after 15,500 words, they might only find it once or twice, okay? So that's the kissing a lot of frogs thing. So I think that there are challenges when we bring word lists into the classroom like this. And here are some of the challenges that we put together in an article, me and Pat Bird. One of the problems is working with word lists that are published in research reports. So what do you do with blah, 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 right, as a teacher? How do you handle that? Now, one of the strengths of Simpson, Black and Alice's work is they went to teachers and they said, what's teachable here? In what we've found, what can you use? And they asked the teachers to bring their intuition into that. Now, for some researchers, as soon as you say teacher intuition, they go, oh my God, that's shocking. How can you do that? But, you know, it's life, you know. Yeah, Michael West did it. Absolutely. It's one way of doing things. It's got strengths and it's got weaknesses. What's the point of having a word list that nobody's going to use, you know? Tom Cobb says, learners like word lists, so you have to give them good ones. That makes sense. Okay, what else? There's not a lot of data on the use and context in published lists. So that's that thing of how does on the basis of get used in texts. And then in the analysis that we did, we found that there were 3 primary ways of doing that. And it's far too late in the day for me to bore you with that. But the main point is these words are in there, they're in the published text. How do you present them to teachers and learners in a way that actually makes them usable? It's quite tough. Some of the AP students, if you said, we're going to tell, you know, on the basis of, they'd go, I'm going home. You know, what's the point? I already know this. You know, what they're really looking for is that technical vocabulary. And then having, as I said just before, having students read enough texts to encounter this vocabulary frequently enough in their learning. Okay, now we're wrapping up. Whew. We got there. So when we're thinking about word lists, and this is of general word lists, of specific word lists, of word lists with just words, of types, of families, specialised or not, we're thinking about the beach. Age, what's the purpose? What's the methodology? Validation, and anything else. So an example of the academic word list is I have engineers saying, you didn't include engineering in this. I was like, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. We didn't teach it at the university at the time. I didn't include it, you know. You included law texts. Yes, because the law faculty is a massive faculty within my school, within my university. A lot of students were studying there, so, you know, there are reasons why people do things. Okay, what else? I think we've touched on quite a few good tools here for ways that people can work with word lists. There's more and more of this happening every day, and there are main drivers of it in the room. The main thing that I really want to say is that I get people saying to me, how can I teach the words in the academic word list? And I just want to call on the words of Paul Nation, who says, I think that's a really bad question. Right? Because you want to look at what are the principles of teaching and learning vocabulary rather than just this specialised list of words. Okay, so you need some principles. So what are the principles? Are you going to focus on the frequent ones, the ones that occur in range? You're going to look at teachability, like Simpson, Black and Ellis did. Are you going to say, well, these are the most useful ones for the learners? Are you going to test them beforehand, see what they know, and then go from there? Are you going to look at the texts that they read and build things from there? Using Nation's 4 strands, are you going to do that? So meaning focused input, meaning focused output. So making sure that they're working well with the vocabulary that they've got and trying to make sure that they become fluent users of those words as well. Okay. So my big, these are chocolate Afghans. These are biscuits. They don't look very nice, but they are. And they have walnuts on the top, which is even more special. Okay, so I've got questions. I'd like one of those. Will word lists become a thing of the past? Are we over them? I review many, many articles in a year looking at different word lists, and it gets more and more specialised. You know, English for nanotechnology, English for, you know, English for dog grooming, here's your word list. English for nail polishing, here's your word list. And while I applaud the effort and I understand what people are trying to achieve, I think we need to be a bit careful of it. And I'm not saying because I want to be alone in my sandpit. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we need to be careful. Have we had enough? Have we got enough general word lists? We know much more now than we did when Michael West was working and doing his collaborative exercise and trying to build a word list. I think we need more on multi-word analysis and finding out really what's going on there, because I think that's quite tricky for learners to figure out what words you use and how you put them all together. Phraseological word list, that's something else I've been working on, and that's even harder than you imagine. And then there's a general question here about what else is out there. So I really wanted to ask you guys to think now about, so to wrap up the workshop, I've got 2 more slides, but what I wanted you to do with now is to turn to the person next to you and say, well, what do you think? So where are we at? What do we need as teachers and learners? Or have we got enough and we just need to figure out how to be smarter with what we've got? And I'm going to give you half a minute because that's all you need. You're smart. I know that. You ready? And the person with the biggest feet, you start first. Go.
I think your feet is
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Quick consensus around the room. What do you reckon? Where are we at? More or not more?
more.
You want more? What do you want? What do we want?
If we could do this, it would be nice if we could all evaluate our students' levels and then somehow evaluate their needs and make our own list scope, which we personalise this so much better.
Yeah.
But we're not all corpus linguists.
Yeah.
So
it's a good question.
Having good lists based on good corpus linguists, science is much better.
Yep. And there's much more to be done, I think, in that field. One thing I really, really want to do, and I haven't managed it yet, is to build a corpus from a university course that's everything that everybody reads and listens to and talks about in the course, and then build a test on the vocabulary from that before the course begins, and then you know what to teach or what to build on through it. Do you know what I mean? And either you're using the corpus in the class or whatever it is that you're doing with that, but basically getting that testing line done. I mean, we're doing it through looking at the vocabulary size test, for example, but it's not fine-grained enough for the kind of work that you're thinking about. Yep, good. Yep, Jay.
We need to do more with teacher training in vocabulary. And a lot of the findings over the past 25 years have not
reach the teachers. Okay, so that's a point about making sure that vocabulary, the research meets the teachers' needs. Yeah.
I think we need to do more training also for learning and the cultural learning of students who gravitate towards learning a list as a student, as opposed to necessarily being users of language in false balance.
It's so tricky, isn't it? Getting that combination right. Because I can understand why people want to memorize something. I understand that. It drives me crazy because what they're going to do is confuse themselves. If they get words that look the same, like this is the thing about the words that will start with com, in the academic word list. There are a lot of them, and you can confuse them quite easily is the problem. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a congress of extensive reading.
Yeah.
And I think we often talk about vocabulary learning through incidental learning through extensive reading, but anybody who's in the field knows it takes a real long time, 20 encounters on average before you learn those words. So it's a very, very slow process. So actually I'd like to make the argument that learning word lists is the perfect supplement to extensive reading.
Okay.
If you do a direct study of vocabulary lists, it's not contextualized, but you're getting some receptive knowledge very quickly of a lot of important words. And then the extensive reading is contextualizing that learning over time.
That's a good point.
So I think they're really complementary activities.
But in a lot of cultures, the students will spend all of their time
just doing that.
the word list and not creating
problem. Yep. Okay. Yep. Good point. Okay. All right. So what I know that I've really talked mostly from my research perspective, which is predominantly in English for academic purposes. So for people who are, looking for extensive reading and looking for that sort of work, I'm sorry I haven't really hit that mark. But what I've been trying to do is to talk about word lists and how they're being used and what's out there for you. So one thing that always heartens me is I had a Chinese guy in my class called Jerry, not his real name, and he came to me after his first year of university and he said, "You know the AWL?" And I said, "Yeah, I do, Jerry." And he said, "I see those words all the time at university." Right? And that, for me, it's a great, it's like, oh, yay, because the last thing you want is him coming, all that time that we spent doing that? That was a complete waste of time. Okay, and here's just a little picture of where I come from. So any more questions, please come and take a look, and thank you very much for coming here today. Thank you.